Hello, my name is Maria Bezubova and you're at my channel Fertilizers Jazz. Here we talk about events, trends, technologies in the world of fertilizers and agriculture. Please subscribe to the channel, put like to this video, and let's jazz! Today is November 10 and this is a weekly markets update. Let's have a look at the news of week 45 and see what are the next trends. Urea market found itself in quite a peculiar situation last week. European pre-CBAM purchasing fever pushed Northern African prices over the roof, but other destinations don't support such significant increase. In Egypt and Algeria, sales prices steadily increased until reached $507 and $500 FOB respectively at the end of the week. All these volumes are destined to Western European buyers. Romanian importers were also active, purchasing at levels between $470 to $75 CFR from different origins. The lineup for the closest future was discussed as much as 100,000 tons and even more. At the same time, Turkish buyers are unwilling to pay such prices. Their target last week was around $415 CFR, which limits them actually to Iranian product only. Iranian producers sold multiple cargoes last week at $375 FOB. East of Suez, two very important events happened last week. First, China caught the whole market by surprise, announcing additional fourth export quota for this year for at least 600,000 tons. As usually, we are lacking details of exact time frame and even exact volume confirmed, but looks like this 600,000 will be granted for shipment through November and December. Exports to India might be permitted. This news weighed on the market sentiment in the region, of course. Market activity was very slow, as both producers and buyers were watching the situation to develop. Another surprise emerged from India, where Indian government decided to immediately tender once again, after the previous tender was finalized with disappointing result. On Friday, IPL announced purchase tender for 2.5 million tons of product, with shipment window through January 15, half to each coast. This fact was not a surprise, rather timing was, because market expected India to wait a bit longer in order to catch lower prices. However, seems that supply security is on top of the list for the government, not priced that much. Chinese export quota should help a lot, of course. India might absorb most of it, that will keep prices east of Suez from significant downward correction. At the same time, Indian RCF announced a long-term purchase tender on Monday last week, based on a period of 3 years. Individual bidders should offer not less than 500,000 tons, and they should be only producers, no traders allowed. The tender is supposed to close on December 1, and prices have to remain valid until March next year. If you're asking me, I would say this tender will never be finalized with any result. Tender conditions are vague, condition regarding price offer is completely unachievable. Excluding traders from the tender also doesn't help, as many producers will never hassle to organize shipments to India on their own. They just don't have such a system in place. So I presume that this idea will die quietly. In the US, prices slipped last week as a response to the news from China. However, let's see the reaction this week after Indian tender announcement. For now, US market is just preparing for the import season, so not much actual activity was registered. Similar tendency was seen in Brazil, where buyers were cautious, watching development in China and India. Some small sales happened in the range similar to last week, between $420 to $30 CFR. Ammonium sulfate price continued softening amid slow demand in Brazil. Copper crystal grade was sold between $150 to $55 FOB China range. Granular product between $155 to $65 FOB. Brazilian buyers stayed on the sidelines evaluating options with urea versus sulfate. At the same time, almost 2 months bottlenecks in Paranaguá port limit importers' options, as Chinese product purchased now may arrive to the inland Brazil to the farmers too late for safrinha crop. In Europe, the purchase fever also touched sulfate segment, with domestic production being significantly limited Due to Fibrant and BASF outage, importers are looking into Chinese origin product purchase. However, the same as in Brazil, it will be too late, as anything purchased now will arrive after January 1 and will be subject to CBAM. In nitrates market, nearly all producers in Europe and UK have raised prices of AN and CAN. Offtake of nitrates in Europe has increased despite price increases, and this is led by importers scrambling to secure deliveries ahead of the implementation of CBAM. Taking advantage of this increase in demand, producers reacted with price increases. Europe faces the logistical challenge of accommodating these purchases, including imports, as warehouses remain stocked with product from a strong harvest season. Russian export values have also firmed up for offers to Europe, although values for sales to Latin America remained around mid-240s FOB level. But demand in that region is muted, and only about 3,000 tons was sold. Agropolychem in Bulgaria has resumed ammonium nitrate production after a scheduled turnaround. In the US, there was an incident at CF Yazoo plant, and nitrates production was suspended. The company informed the market that for now it is too early to indicate exact timing when the plant will be back to production. Yazoo plant is a large nitrates producer with 1.4 million tons of annual capacity of ammonium nitrate and 524,000 tons of UAN capacity. So, if the outage lasts for long, it will push domestic prices up. In the ammonia market, supply continued tightening last week. East of Suez prices have surged by more than $30 to the wide range of $400 to $500 FOB Middle East. This level opens the way to shipments west of Suez, where buyers are almost desperately looking for tons. On top of Ma'aden outage, the Armenian producer in Salalah is planning to start 3 weeks turnaround. China is now the only producer that can provide spot availability before the end of the year. Price to Europe remained unchanged versus last week, as buyers are resisting any further price increase. Of course, everyone is eagerly waiting for one of the US plants, either Woodside or Gulf Coast, to start exports ASAP in quota 4, as they planned. But for now, there is no fresh information. Nutrient plants in Trinidad continue to stay idle, as solution regarding port fees was not identified yet. In phosphate segment, it was another week of price softening across the globe, amid slow buying activity. And this happened despite bullish trend in sulfur and ammonia. In India, importers stayed on the sidelines waiting for the clarification regarding subsidy that still hasn't arrived last week. Also, stocks previously imported are high, and there is no deficit on the farmers' level. On top of that, seems like Indian ports are extremely congested with all fertilizers heading to the country, which limits importers' options. CFR price level dropped last week to $712 to $25 range. Producers' offers also dropped sharply. OCP reported sales of 26,000 tons to the Western European markets at only $735 to $50 FOB, huge decrease from previous levels. Ma'aden sold to India at $728 as per company's information. In Bangladesh, some movements with LCs opening for purchase of Chinese cargoes for the latest private sector tender are evident. Totally 800,000 tons were secured by LCs. Let's see how the situation moves forward. Chinese export quota left was evaluated around 100,000 tons only, and price was falling same as everywhere. DAP price at FOB dropped last week to the range between $700 and $705 amid sluggish demand. In Brazil, there were only a couple of spot deals that resulted with price decrease versus a week ago. MAP was sold in the range between $650 to $60 CFR. Demand from the US was muted, so no sales were registered. Moving to the fundamentals. European natural gas futures remained unchanged at the level of 31 euros per megawatt hour. TTF prompt and near-curve prices have continued to hold stable in recent weeks, as mild weather has delayed the onset of the heating season. And EU firms have flipped back to net gas injections in the past fortnight after an early stock draw in the first 3 weeks of October. During October 9 to 20, muted wind power output in Germany, strikes at LNG terminals in France, and cold spells across northwest and central Europe contributed to net withdrawals. Slow wind output forecast for the next 7 days could also lead firms in Northeast Europe to turn to withdrawals to meet quicker demand from gas-fired plants. US natural gas futures continued increasing and reached $4.3 per MMBtu on Friday. Lower temperatures across the country provoked higher heating demand, but warmer than normal weather through November 21 is set to curb it. Increasing LNG exports to Europe and Asia added to the trend. Flows to the 8 major LNG plants are expected to keep rising as Europe seeks alternatives to Russian gas and Asian buyers negotiate long-term US supply commitments. Agricultural commodities future prices moved differently last week. Wheat futures jumped in the middle of the week to $5.5 per bushel, but then retreated to the level similar to last week. This increase happened mostly due to expectations of a rebound in Chinese demand. Over last weekend, a major Chinese grains importer reportedly inquired about US wheat cargoes for shipment between December and February. According to US Department of Agriculture data, China has not purchased American wheat since early October last year. Despite the bullish signals, ample global supply may temper gains. The USDA has not yet released its weekly crop progress reports, but analysts estimate US winter wheat planting is 84% complete, broadly in line with the multi-year average. And significant Russian and Argentinian harvests will weigh on the market. Corn futures slightly dropped to $4.27 per bushel level. Although there was brief upward momentum earlier in the session, it didn't hold, as traders reacted to sluggish export pace, technical resistance, and ongoing drought across much of the US Midwest. About 35% of the region, that includes 9 states, was suffering from drought last week, up just over a percentage point from the week prior. Export activity was slow, although exact figures are still not available due to the shutdown in the US. Soybean futures inched up to more than $11 per bushel after China announced it would restore export eligibility for 3 US firms starting November 10. Prices have fluctuated this week as traders digested a series of developments following the US-China trade truce. During the China International Import-Export, Beijing signed several agricultural purchase agreements, including soybeans, though actual purchase volumes remain unclear. Despite the positive signals, US soybeans still face a 13% tariff, compared with just 3% for Brazilian and Argentinian supplies, limiting US price competitiveness. Markets are also awaiting the USDA November supply and demand report, delayed due to the shutdown. Moving to the shipping industry. The Drewry World Container Index increased by 8%. This is the 4th straight week of increase, following a prolonged decline over 17 consecutive weeks. Spot rates from China to the US continued growing on the back of November 1 general rates increase. Carriers continue to implement GRIs to counter the downward pressure on spot rates from increased capacity. However, this upward momentum is expected to be short-lived, with rates likely to soften unless further GRIs are introduced. Same tendency is evident in the rates from China to Europe. Carriers are trying to push spot rates up by introducing higher freight, all-kind rates, effective November, in an attempt to elevate spot rates before the start of the new annual contract negotiation season. The Baltic Exchange Dry Index increased by more than 100 points last week. The Capesize market recorded a notable improvement, with momentum building steadily across both basins. A mixed week for the sector with no real clear direction, as areas such as North Atlantic saw rates under pressure for most part, only to consolidate towards the back end of the week. Similarly, the South Atlantic saw renewed decent demand on front-haul business for first half December, which gave owners some hope. For Ultra Supramax segment, it was a positional week overall. The US Gulf and South Atlantic saw renewed interest as the week progressed, with stronger rates being discussed from the US Gulf. The handysize market also endured a generally subdued week, with soft sentiment prevailing across all regions. To sum up, global urea market is torn between two different trends: pre-CBAM purchase fever in Europe that drives Northern African prices crazy, versus price softening elsewhere globally amid Chinese additional export quota news. At the same time, fresh Indian tender that emerged on Friday might push price level East of Suez also higher. So, as already discussed last week, the bullish sentiment will stay in the nitrogen market for now. Ammonium sulfate price softened amid slow demand from Brazil. Again, European market was thin in itself, where price increased due to outage of domestic producers and CBAM. Ammonia price increased more amid further supply tightening east of Suez, and no positive development west of Suez. Phosphates price continued its downward rally on the background of waning demand in the key markets, even despite sulfur and ammonia price increase. Natural gas price in Europe kept stable, while in the US more increase was registered mostly due to high demand for LNG. Future price for wheat hasn't changed, and for corn even dropped, as the positive momentum after the US-China trade negotiations was balanced by increasing supply pressure. Soybean future price surged more amid confirmed purchases from China that are supposed to start immediately. Container shipping rates increased more as a result of general rates increases by key lines operators. Bulk shipping activity also increased, especially in Capesize segment. So, let's see what is next around the corner. But it will be already next week. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, put like to this video, push the bell in order not to miss any updates, and see you soon.